The morning had begun like any other. The low hum of turbines filled the cabin of the C-27 reconnaissance aircraft as Captain Michael Hale leveled his altitude above the cold shimmer of the Bering Sea. Outside the cockpit, the horizon stretched in every direction, a pale, endless sheet of gray water blending with a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the earth. He had flown this route dozens of times before, tracing invisible lines through clouds and wind, a guardian of nothingness between Alaska and the open Pacific. It was the kind of duty most pilots found monotonous, but for Hale, monotony was peace. He glanced at the instruments, each glowing softly in the dim cabin light, then checked the digital log scrolling across the screen on his right. Everything was in perfect order, fuel levels stable, wind speed moderate, barometric pressure steady. He allowed himself to lean back slightly, one gloved hand resting loosely on the throttle. Routine, predictable, safe. After years of rescue operations, storm chases, and emergency deployments, he found a strange comfort in days like this. Days when the only sound was the steady heartbeat of his aircraft and the whisper of the wind against the fuselage. Beneath that calm, however, there was always vigilance. Hale's eyes moved constantly, trained to sweep the dials, the radar, the horizon. The Navy had drilled that habit into him years ago. Never trust stillness. Trouble hides in the quiet moments. It was a lesson carved from experience-lost aircraft, silent distress calls, tragedies that had begun with weather reports just as peaceful as this one. He adjusted his headset and took a sip from the metal thermos at his side. Coffee had gone lukewarm, but it didn't matter. His thoughts drifted briefly to Anchorage, to the small suburban house where his wife and son waited. Sarah would be getting ready for work. Their boy, Ethan, probably dragging his feet at breakfast, inventing excuses to skip school. The memory made Michael smile, though faintly. Flying always carried a paradox with it. The higher he went, the farther he felt from the world he loved, and yet somehow, the closer he came to understanding it. Up here, there were no voices, no chaos, only the hum of the engines and the boundless quiet that few people ever experience. The calm was interrupted by a faint ping on the radar. A single blip flickered in the corner of the display. Hale frowned, leaned forward, and tapped the glass. It didn't vanish. The signal pulsed again, weak, intermittent, but real. He adjusted the range, narrowing the sweep to isolate it. The blip appeared near a section of ocean known as Echo Sector, an expanse officially logged as barren, without traffic or structures of any kind. It wasn't unusual for the radar to pick up false echoes. Storms, birds, even waves could distort readings. Still, instinct told him to investigate. He keyed the mic. "Command, this is Flight 79, picking up a minor radar contact in Echo Sector, grid reference 472 by 918. Possibly interference, but I'm moving to confirm. Over." Static filled his ears. The response came delayed, broken by atmospheric distortion. "Copy that, 79. Proceed with visual confirmation, then resume patrol. Weather system approaching from southwest. Keep an eye on your clock." "Roger that." He cut the transmission and adjusted his course slightly east. Outside the window, the ocean caught the faint glint of morning light, its surface trembling under a thin wind. He squinted into the haze, scanning for anything unusual. At first, there was nothing, just water, sky, and the line where one met the other. Then, as minutes passed, a faint shape emerged near the horizon. It was land. That shouldn't have been possible. Not here. He pulled up the navigation charts again. The sector was blank. No registered islands, no recorded reefs, nothing. Yet the shape grew more distinct as he approached, an uneven crescent of pale sand fringed by dark green. A small island, maybe a mile across at most, lonely and silent amid the endless gray sea. Curiosity prickled at him. Hale's training urged him to document the coordinates, take photographs, and report the anomaly later. But something tugged deeper, an unease he couldn't quite name. He banked lower, descending to 2,000 feet, and circled wide. The island came into sharper focus now, a ring of beach enclosing a dense interior of pine and moss. Then he saw it. On the southern shore, carved across the sand in crude, uneven letters, were 3 unmistakable characters. SOS. Hale's chest tightened. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The message was real huge, formed from rocks and driftwood dragged together by hand. No question what it meant. Someone was down there. His pulse quickened. He grabbed the camera mounted to the cockpit and zoomed in. The shoreline showed no movement, no figures, but the letters were unmistakably fresh. The edges were sharp, not yet smoothed by tide. Whoever had written them was still alive, or had been very recently. He toggled the radio again. "Command, this is Hale, Flight 79. I have visual confirmation of distress signal on unidentified island. Coordinates transmitting now." Silence. He waited, repeated. Still nothing. The static deepened, the storm front's interference growing stronger as clouds gathered on the horizon. He checked the weather radar. The system was moving faster than expected, dragging a wall of wind and rain in its path. Within an hour, this entire area would be under heavy turbulence. He had time for one more pass. "Come on," he muttered, tapping the side of the console. The static only hissed louder. Cut off. Alone. He looked back toward the island. His heart beat harder as he made a slow, banking turn, lowering altitude again. Then he saw them, three figures breaking from the line of trees, stumbling across the sand. They waved, arms flailing wildly. Their movements were frantic, desperate. He zoomed the camera again. They were thin, unsteady, barely able to stand. Two men and a woman, from what he could tell. Even from this distance, their gestures carried something more than simple relief. They weren't just calling for rescue. They were begging. "Jesus," he whispered under his breath. He tightened his grip on the controls, circling once more. The radar pinged again, faint but steady this time. Something moving inland. Larger, maybe metallic, maybe human. He scanned the tree line. Nothing. But the way the survivors moved their fear. It wasn't only hunger or thirst that drove it. They kept glancing behind them, toward the forest. A shiver crept down his spine. His rational mind raced through possibilities. A crashed vessel, a lost crew, maybe smugglers, fishermen gone off course. Yet everything about their behavior screamed danger. The island, the hidden movement, the vanishing radio, all of it coalesced into one uneasy truth. He had found something he was never meant to see. The clouds above thickened, blotting out the pale sunlight. Winds began to buffet the wings. He glanced at the clock 40 minutes before the storm reached him. Enough time maybe to act. Protocol dictated he should log the coordinates and leave. But procedure had never saved anyone's life in a situation like this. He thought of the wrecks he'd flown over before the debris, the reports that always came too late. He could already imagine the official line, "Lost before rescue could arrive." He had written those words himself once, and he had sworn never to do it again. The radio crackled suddenly, a ghost of sound breaking through. 7-9, repeat coordinates. Storm warning, immediate. The voice vanished under static before he could respond. He looked down at the three figures on the sand. They were collapsing now, too weak to keep waving, but still moving toward the open stretch of beach. His breath quickened. They were alive. Barely. And he was the only one who could help. Hale reached for the throttle, leveling the aircraft for another pass. The beach looked narrow, uneven, but long enough for a careful landing if he judged the approach right. The tide was rising fast, though, and the wind was shifting south. Risking a landing here was madness, but flying away, leaving them to die, was worse. He stared out at the island once more. The trees swayed unnaturally as though something moved beneath them. The sky darkened further. The storm's leading edge was nearly upon him. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the decision solidify in his chest. He had minutes to choose. Somewhere inside the cockpit, an alarm beeped, a proximity warning triggered by turbulence ahead. Hale silenced it, hands steady on the controls. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke aloud, not to command, but to himself. Not this time. The engines roared as he banked into his descent path, the island growing larger in the windshield. Spray from the waves rose to meet him. The survivors were still there, tiny figures lifting their arms once more as if sensing his intent. The storm gathered over them, a wall of darkness pressing down, but Hale no longer hesitated. He guided the aircraft lower, every movement precise, every calculation running through instinct more than thought. He would land on that strip of sand. He would bring them out. Whatever was waiting in that forest, whatever secret this forgotten island held, he was already part of it. The moment he crossed the invisible line between air and earth, his life and theirs would change forever. And as the first gusts of the storm buffeted his wings, Captain Michael Hale began his final approach toward Echo Island, unaware that his act of mercy was about to unravel something far darker than a simple rescue. The landing jolted through Michael Hale's entire body like an electric current. The wheels hit the sand hard, skidding across the uneven surface as a cloud of white spray exploded around the aircraft. He felt the tires sink for a fraction of a second, the entire plane trembling under the strain. His hands stayed firm on the yoke, guiding, correcting, coaxing the heavy machine into submission. The world outside was a blur of motion waves curling dangerously close to the landing gear, palms bending backward in the rising wind, gulls shrieking above as if protesting his intrusion. Then finally, after a long, teeth-gritting drag, the aircraft slowed, bounced once more, and came to a grinding halt. For several seconds, Hale simply sat still, breathing hard, his fingers locked on the controls. The roar of the engines began to fade, replaced by the muffled crash of waves against the beach. The storm clouds hung low and dark above the horizon, rolling forward like an army. He shut down the engines, the sudden silence inside the cockpit heavy enough to make his ears ring. The hum that had always been his comfort was gone, leaving only the raw sound of nature, a storm and a secret island holding its breath. He turned toward the window. The survivors were still there, barely visible through the streaks of rain starting to patter against the glass. They were moving weakly toward the plane, stumbling through the sand, as if each step might be their last. The sight drove out the last of his hesitation. He grabbed his survival pack, checked his sidearm, and unlatched the door. The moment it opened, a gust of salty wind slammed into him, carrying the smell of wet earth, seaweed, and decay. The air was thick, heavy, electric. He descended the small ladder, boots sinking into the wet sand. The ground felt alive under his feet, trembling faintly with the pulse of the storm. He moved toward the three figures, his voice raised above the wind. "It's all right. You're safe now." They didn't answer, not in words. One of the men, his face leathery and sunburned to a mask of exhaustion, fell to his knees, clutching at Hale's sleeve when he reached them. His lips moved, forming silent words before a rasping whisper escaped. "Please, not the trees. Please." The woman beside him, barely more than a shadow of herself, clung to the younger man's arm. Her eyes were wide and glassy, fixed not on Hale but on the tree line behind him. He followed her gaze. The palms swayed violently under the wind's assault, but between them he thought he saw something darker, move, something that didn't sway with the rhythm of the storm. It could have been a trick of light, a play of shadows. It could have been something else. He helped the survivors toward the aircraft, one by one, half carrying the woman. Her body was light, almost weightless, bones and rags, and a pulse so faint it seemed impossible she was still standing. They huddled beneath the wing, shielded from the worst of the rain. Hale handed them water from his emergency kit. The two men drank greedily, coughing and choking as if their bodies had forgotten how to accept nourishment. The woman sipped slowly, trembling with each swallow. He studied them closely. Their clothes were tattered, sun-bleached, and torn, not just by time but by violence. There were marks on their wrists, raw, red abrasions that could only have come from rope or wire. His stomach turned cold. These were not simple castaways. Something had happened here, something darker than shipwreck or storm. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. His voice was calm, measured, though his mind raced. "How long have you been here?" The older man met his eyes for a moment, then shook his head as though speaking aloud might summon something. He pointed instead toward the trees again, his hands shaking. Hale looked once more but saw only darkness between the trunks. The forest loomed like a living wall, dense and secretive, its shadows deep enough to hide anything. The first drops of heavy rain began to fall, splattering against the metal skin of the plane. The storm was closing in fast, faster than forecast. He needed to decide whether to try taking off again or stay until it passed. Every instinct told him flying in this weather was suicide. The winds alone could toss him like a leaf the moment he left the ground. That meant waiting, exposed, surrounded by an island that grew stranger by the minute. He checked his radio again, hoping the higher altitude during descent might have cleared the interference. But the headset hissed with the same wall of static. He switched frequencies, adjusted dials, tried everything he knew. Nothing. He was cut off completely. When he looked up, he found the younger man staring at him, eyes hollow but alert. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but all that came was a hoarse whisper. "They're still here." "Who?" Hale asked. The man only shook his head and dropped his gaze to the sand. The woman flinched at the sound of thunder overhead, pressing herself closer to the aircraft as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to safety. Hale followed their glances back toward the forest again. The rain blurred everything now, streaks of gray obscuring the edge of the tree line. Still, through the curtain of downpour, he thought he saw movement again, this time unmistakably human. He straightened, every nerve alive with awareness. There were at least two of them, maybe three, silhouettes moving between the trees with deliberate rhythm, not staggering like survivors, but creeping, watching. His training kicked in instinctively. He stepped slightly in front of the survivors, one hand brushing against his holster, eyes fixed on the forest. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then lightning flashed across the sky, and in that instant of white brilliance, he saw them clearly, figures standing at the edge of the jungle, half hidden by branches. Their clothes hung in tatters, their faces obscured, but their posture was unmistakable. They were not lost. They were waiting. When the light faded, they were gone again, swallowed by the shadows. Hale's heart hammered in his chest. He took a slow breath, forcing calm. He'd seen enough to know this was no illusion. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be seen. That alone made them dangerous. He crouched again beside the survivors. "You need to tell me what's happening here. Who are those people?" The older man finally spoke, his voice cracking like old wood. "They took the others. After the wreck, we thought they were rescuers. They weren't." He coughed, clutching at his chest. "They made us work, made us find things for them. They said no one would ever come. They said this island was invisible." His eyes flickered toward the forest again. "They'll come for us when the storm passes." Hale felt the weight of those words settle over him like the gathering thunder. Invisible. That would explain the lack of records, the radio silence, even the distorted radar echo. A place deliberately kept off the grid. His mind raced through possibilities: illegal trade routes, smuggling operations, maybe even human trafficking. Whatever the truth, he was in the middle of it now. He turned toward the plane, measuring the tide. Water crept closer with each wave. If he stayed much longer, takeoff would become impossible. But if he left now, he'd be abandoning them to whatever monsters lurked in that jungle. The memory of his last failure. The fishing crew lost because he'd followed procedure instead of instinct. Rose unbidden in his mind. He had sworn never again. Lightning split the sky again, followed by a crack of thunder that rolled across the island like cannon fire. The survivors flinched, cowering against the aircraft. Hale scanned the horizon. The storm's main body was nearly overhead now, the wind howling, bending the trees until they looked ready to snap. He had no time to think, only to act. He herded the three survivors into the narrow space under the wing, pulling emergency tarps and strapping them down to create a makeshift shelter. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the sand into mud, the waves creeping closer to the plane's tail. The air was thick with salt and electricity. Every breath stung. Through the noise of the storm, he heard something else, a sound that didn't belong, a low rhythmic thud, like feet striking wet ground. He looked up sharply. Between gusts of wind, figures were moving out of the forest. Half a dozen, maybe more, barely visible through the curtain of rain. They moved slowly, deliberately, their bodies hunched, their silhouettes distorted by lightning flashes. Hale's hand went to his pistol. He didn't draw it yet, but held it ready. His voice was firm when he spoke to the survivors. "Stay behind the plane. Don't move unless I tell you." The older man nodded, too weak to protest. The woman covered her head, trembling violently. The younger man pressed his back to the landing gear, eyes wide. Hale stepped forward into the open, rain drenching his flight suit instantly. The figures stopped about 50 yards away, forming a loose line at the edge of the beach. For a moment, no one moved. The storm howled around them, thunder cracking overhead, the sea roaring behind. Hale could see them more clearly now. They were gaunt but not starving, their faces sharp, their eyes burning with something between hunger and fury. One of them shouted something, but the words were torn away by the wind. Hale didn't answer. His training told him to avoid escalation, but the way they spread out slowly, carefully, wasn't random. They were circling. Lightning flared again, and in its glare he saw the glint of metal knives, makeshift blades, maybe pieces of the wreck repurposed into weapons. The reality hit him like a punch. These weren't survivors. They were predators. He took a step back, measuring the distance between him and the aircraft. The odds were bad. He couldn't protect the survivors in an open fight. The storm was his only ally now, and even that was turning against him. The wind screamed, the rain came sideways, visibility dropping to almost nothing. Then as quickly as they had appeared, the men retreated, melting back into the forest as if swallowed by the storm. Hale stood frozen for a long time, gun in hand, until the last shadow disappeared. Only the hiss of rain remained. He lowered his arms slowly, chest heaving. The storm was reaching its peak. There would be no rescue tonight, no radio, no flight, only endurance. He returned to the aircraft and crouched beside the survivors again. Their eyes asked questions he couldn't answer. "We'll make it through the night," he said quietly. "Then we'll find a way off this island." The words sounded hollow even to him, but he forced conviction into them. He had to keep them calm. Fear was more dangerous than any weapon in a place like this. As darkness fell fully over the island, Hale sat with his back against the plane's wheel, pistol resting across his lap. The survivors slept fitfully beneath the tarp, their bodies twitching with fever dreams. The rain hammered relentlessly, washing away the SOS letters on the beach grain by grain. And beyond the line of trees, hidden by storm and shadow, something watched patient, waiting for the dawn. Captain Michael Hale kept his eyes open long after the others had fallen silent, the echo of the jungle whispering like a warning through the storm. The island that shouldn't have existed had revealed its presence, and he knew now with absolute certainty that it would not let them go easily. Dawn crept over the island like a hesitant intruder. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky veiled in ash-gray clouds that hung low and heavy over the horizon. The air was thick with moisture, the scent of salt and rotting vegetation mingling into something sour that clung to the back of the throat. Captain Michael Hale stirred from his half-sleep against the wheel of his aircraft, his body stiff, his muscles aching from hours of tension. He opened his eyes to a world washed pale by the aftermath of rain. The once clear beach was scarred with debris branches, seaweed, shards of wood from the wrecked vessel at the far end of the shore. The tide had risen during the night, licking dangerously close to the aircraft's landing gear, but the plane had held firm. The 3 survivors were huddled beneath the tarp where he had left them, their bodies pressed together like frightened animals. The woman was still asleep, or perhaps only pretending to be. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The older man lay on his side, clutching his chest, while the younger one sat upright, staring blankly into the mist that still clung to the tree line. His eyes were sunken, but they moved constantly, scanning, flinching at every sound, the distant cry of a seabird, the rustle of wind through wet leaves. Fear had taken root so deeply in him that even silence seemed a wound. Hale rose slowly, stretching, the joints in his back cracking. The island was eerily quiet. No voices, no movement, no sign of the figures that had appeared during the storm. The forest loomed ahead, dark and dense, each tree slick with rain. It felt alive in the way dangerous places often do, listening, waiting. He checked his pistol, then slung his field bag over his shoulder and walked toward the tide line. His boots sank slightly into the damp sand with each step, leaving shallow prints that the waves hungrily began to erase. The wrecked boat was clearer now in the morning light. It was larger than he'd realized, at least 40 feet long. The hull split in two where it had slammed against the reef. The name was still faintly visible on one side. The Horizon Dawn letters chipped and faded, but legible enough. He crouched beside the wreckage, running his hand along the torn wood. The ship hadn't been here long. The edges of the break were sharp, unweathered. Maybe weeks, not months. There were no official records of any missing vessel by that name in his patrol sector, which made sense now. Whoever had come here hadn't wanted to be found. He found traces of life among the ruins, empty cans, a broken compass, a tangle of fishing net, and footprints half erased by the tide. But there was something else, something that made his stomach tighten. Near the rocks where the surf met the beach lay a pile of bones, small and fragile, picked clean. He forced himself to kneel, examining them. Animal bones, perhaps, but among them, half buried in wet sand, he spotted something unmistakable, a human finger bone, thin and pale as ivory. He stood abruptly, scanning the tree line again. The forest stared back, indifferent. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the air. When he returned to the survivors, the younger man was waiting for him, his expression tense. "You shouldn't go near the wreck," he said hoarsely. "They watch it. It's their warning." "Whose?" Hale asked, though he already knew the answer. The man looked toward the trees. "The ones who took us. They said the wreck belongs to them. Everything here belongs to them." Hale felt the words sink like stones. He crouched beside him. "How many are there?" "I don't know," the man whispered. 10, maybe more. Some went inland after the storm. Some didn't make it. He swallowed hard. "They don't talk much. They just take what they need. Food, water, people." The woman stirred at that last word, her head lifting weakly. "They said they'd leave us for the sea," she murmured, her voice little more than a breath. "Said it was mercy." Her eyes met Hale's, and in them he saw not the flicker of hope, but the dull resignation of someone who had seen death too closely to believe in miracles anymore. He reached into his pack, pulling out a ration bar, breaking it into pieces, and handing it to them. They ate slowly, as if afraid the food might vanish if they moved too quickly. He looked toward the horizon. The storm clouds were retreating east, and with them went his chance for immediate rescue. The radio still gave nothing but static. The interference that blanketed this place was unnatural, deliberate even. He suspected now that the island's isolation wasn't an accident of geography, it was enforced. He weighed his options. Taking off in the current conditions was still risky, but if the sand dried enough by afternoon, he might have a window. The question was whether he could get the survivors aboard safely and whether the men who haunted the forest would allow it. As the day wore on, the heat rose, turning the air thick and oppressive. Hale spent the hours checking the aircraft, ensuring the engines hadn't taken damage from the salt spray. Everything seemed intact. That small relief steadied him, but the feeling didn't last. The island never stopped watching. He could feel it in the way the trees shifted at the edge of his vision, the way silence broke suddenly, sharply, as though something unseen moved just out of sight. At midday, while the survivors rested in the shade of the wing, he ventured a little closer to the forest. The ground there was softer, littered with leaves and broken branches. He saw tracks, footprints, some barefoot, some in worn boots. They led both toward and away from the beach. Near one of the trees, he found a makeshift spear, its tip hardened in fire. He crouched, examining it, when a faint sound reached his ears. A whisper, perhaps, or the rustle of fabric. He froze, listening. For a moment, nothing. Then a voice, distant but clear. "Leave!" Hale turned sharply, gun raised, but saw only shadows. The forest was still. Then, as if mocking him, a single stone rolled from the underbrush and stopped at his feet. His pulse quickened. He backed away slowly, never turning his back until he reached open sand again. The survivors were awake now, staring at him in terror, as though they had heard it too. "They don't like visitors," the older man said quietly. "They told us the same thing when we tried to leave. The ones who disobeyed—" He trailed off, shuddering. Hale looked at the tree line again. The darkness beneath those ancient trees. Somewhere in there, unseen eyes were watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. He needed to move fast. By late afternoon, the wind had shifted. The sand under the aircraft had begun to dry, and the tide was receding. Hale knew this was his only chance. "We're leaving," he said firmly. "All of us." The survivors looked at him with disbelief. The younger man shook his head. "You don't understand. They won't let us. They'll come when they see you move the plane." Let them, Hale said. We won't be here long enough for them to stop us. He began preparing the aircraft, checking the flaps, clearing debris from the sand near the wheels. The survivors helped as best they could, though their movements were sluggish. As they worked, the jungle seemed to grow quieter, the wind dying down until the only sound was their own breathing. Hale felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air, the prickle at the back of his neck. He looked up and froze. Figures were emerging from the trees again. This time there were more of them, at least a dozen, moving in a loose formation across the beach. They carried sticks, makeshift weapons, a few rusted knives glinting in the fading light. Their faces were hollow but not starving. These were men who had adapted, who had made this place their own. Hale drew his pistol, his voice low. Get behind the plane. The survivors obeyed without hesitation, stumbling into the narrow space beneath the wing. The group on the beach kept coming, their steps slow, deliberate. One of them called out, his voice rough with disuse. The island keeps what it takes. You don't belong here. Hale said nothing. His finger hovered near the trigger, his mind calculating angles, distances, the reach of his weapon versus theirs. The odds were impossible. He couldn't fight them all, not without endangering the people he was trying to save. The standoff stretched long and tense. The men stopped about 30 feet away, forming a line. The leader, a tall man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, tilted his head slightly, studying Hale with something almost like amusement. You think you can take them? You think the storm brought you here by chance? He gestured toward the jungle. No one leaves. The island decides. Hale's pulse thundered in his ears. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of the sea, sharp and cold. He took one step back toward the cockpit, keeping his gun raised. Maybe you've forgotten what the real world looks like, he said evenly. But I haven't, and I'm taking them home. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the leader smiled, a slow, joyless twist of his mouth. Then you'll die with them. He raised his hand, and the men behind him surged forward. Hale fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked like thunder, echoing across the beach. The attackers flinched but didn't stop. He fired again, this time closer, kicking up sand near their feet. That gave them pause. The leader's expression hardened. He wasn't afraid, but he understood force. He spat into the sand, then motioned his men to stop. The two sides stared at each other across the rain-scoured beach, the ocean growling in the background. Hale could feel every muscle in his body trembling with tension. The leader took one last look at him, then turned back toward the forest. The sea rises tonight, he said. If you're still here when it does, it'll take you too. Then they were gone, melting into the trees once more. Hale didn't lower his gun until the last of them vanished. His breath came in ragged bursts. He turned to the survivors. Get ready. We're leaving now. They moved quickly, desperation lending them strength. Hale climbed into the cockpit, heart hammering, and started the engines. The turbines roared to life, cutting through the silence. The survivors clung to their seats, pale and shaking. He taxied the plane down the length of beach, every nerve focused on the narrow strip of sand that separated life from disaster. The engines strained, the wheels bumping over uneven ground, the ocean clawing at the edges. Then just as the nose lifted and the aircraft began to rise, something struck the tail. A heavy impact that threw the plane sideways. Hale fought for control, muscles screaming, the horizon spinning. Through the rear window, he saw movement figures on the beach, shouting, throwing rocks, sticks, anything they could grasp. The plane steadied, clawing its way upward, but the impact had done damage. One of the stabilizers shuddered violently. He kept climbing, higher and higher, until the island was a shrinking blot of green and gray below. The survivors wept softly behind him. Hale's hands were steady, but his mind burned with images of what he'd seen. The bones, the shadows, the hollow faces in the trees. They were safe for now. But as he adjusted his course toward the mainland, a flicker of static broke through the radio again, a whisper of sound beneath the interference. It was faint, almost lost, but he caught a single phrase before it vanished into silence. You shouldn't have left. Hale stared at the console, his reflection pale in the glass. Outside, the clouds thickened once more, and far below, the island faded beneath the rising mist. He didn't look back, but he knew deep down that the fear he had left behind on that cursed shore hadn't stayed there. It had followed him, carried on the whisper of the storm. The sky had turned a color Michael Hale could not quite name, a bruised blend of gray and violet, the hue of something caught between day and night. The aircraft trembled as it fought through the turbulence, the engines laboring against the thick wall of wind. The survivors sat motionless behind him, too exhausted even to speak. Their faces were pale, eyes glazed, and the steady hum of the engines had lulled them into a fragile silence. For a moment, Hale thought they might actually make it back to base, that the nightmare of the island would dissolve into memory. But deep down, he knew better. The warning voice that had broken through the radio haunted him. "You shouldn't have left." The words replayed over and over, like a pulse hidden beneath the static. He had tried every channel after that, every frequency he knew, but there was nothing. Only that same faint hiss, like breath against glass. His instruments flickered once, twice, before stabilizing again. For a brief, cold second, he wondered if the island itself had left something inside the plane. Some invisible tether, a trace of the madness that clung to that cursed patch of earth. He checked his compass, and his stomach sank. The needle spun aimlessly, refusing to settle. He tapped it once, twice, then harder. No change. The GPS display blinked and froze. The radar, too, began to lose definition, the clean lines of the coastline dissolving into haze. It was impossible. He was already miles away from the island. He should have clear navigation by now. Yet every instrument told the same story. He was flying into nowhere. He took a steadying breath. "Don't panic," he muttered to himself, though his pulse betrayed him. He adjusted the heading manually, relying on instinct and memory. He knew these skies, had flown them countless times, but now even the horizon looked wrong. The clouds moved strangely, shifting in slow spirals as if something vast turned behind them. A sharp cry startled him. The woman in the back seat had woken, clutching the armrest, her eyes wide with terror. "They're here," she whispered. "They followed us." Hale turned, his voice calm but firm. "You're safe now. Whatever happened there is over." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. The island doesn't let you leave. No one leaves." Her voice rose to a panicked pitch before the younger man grabbed her hand, murmuring softly until she quieted. Hale turned back to the controls, jaw tight. Her words echoed the warning of the islanders, and though he wanted to dismiss them as trauma, he couldn't ignore the crawling dread in his chest. Then the first impact came. It was faint at first, a dull thud against the hull, like something striking the plane from below. Hale froze, eyes flicking to the gauges, no loss of pressure, no engine failure. Then another thud, louder this time, closer to the tail. The survivors stirred, frightened. Hale's hands tightened on the yoke. "Hold on," he said sharply. "It's just debris from the storm." But he knew there was no storm debris at this altitude. The aircraft shuddered again. The noise was unmistakable now, metal scraping against metal. Something was out there, moving along the underside of the plane. Hale fought the instinct to look out the window. Instead, he leveled the aircraft, climbing to a higher altitude. The noise grew louder for a few seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. For 10 long minutes, no one spoke. Then gradually the clouds ahead began to thin. A thin line of light broke through, revealing the faint outline of ocean below. Relief surged through him. They were clear. He angled the plane toward the distant shimmer of water, adjusting course for anchorage. Maybe the instruments were still scrambled from the storm. Maybe it was all just interference. Maybe. But when the clouds fully parted, he saw it, and the breath left his lungs. Below them lay the same island. It was impossible. The same curve of beach, the same line of forest, the same reef jutting from the sea like broken teeth. For a moment he thought he was hallucinating, that fatigue and fear had conjured it. But the coordinates confirmed it, or would have, if the instruments hadn't gone blank. He had been flying straight for over an hour. There was no way he could have circled back. Yet the proof lay beneath him, immutable and real. The younger man saw it too. "No," he whispered. No, no, no. The woman began to sob quietly. Hale's knuckles whitened around the controls. Hold tight, he said, voice clipped. We're going around. We'll find open water. He turned the aircraft sharply eastward, pushing the engines harder. The island receded behind them, swallowed by mist. He kept flying. 10 minutes, 20, 30. The ocean stretched endlessly, unbroken, perfect. Then the mist cleared again, and there it was. The island waited below, unchanged. For the first time in years, Hale felt something close to real fear. Not the disciplined kind he'd learned to master in combat, but the primal, suffocating kind that gnaws at logic itself. He pulled the aircraft into a steep climb, determined to gain altitude, to find some vantage that could prove what his senses denied. The engines strained, vibrating under the effort, and the survivors clutched their seats, eyes wild. The altimeter climbed, then froze, the needle trembling between readings. The higher they went, the thicker the clouds became, until visibility dropped to nothing. Lightning flashed nearby, close enough to rattle the cabin. Hale swore under his breath. He leveled off, eyes scanning the dim whiteness ahead. That was when he saw it, something massive moving through the clouds, far too large to be another aircraft. A dark shape, vague yet immense, gliding silently parallel to them. It kept pace for several seconds, then drifted closer. At first he thought it might be the storm reflecting light oddly, or his mind playing tricks. But then the shape resolved into something unmistakable: trees, the canopy of a forest, impossibly suspended in the mist, and beneath it, the faint glimmer of firelight. It was the island again, floating in the sky. Hale's rational mind fractured for a moment, his breath catching in his throat. The woman screamed, and the younger man covered her mouth, eyes filled with the terror of recognition. It's showing us, he said. It's showing what it is. Hale didn't answer. He yanked the controls hard, banking away, forcing the engines to full throttle. The forest receded, swallowed by the clouds again. When they finally broke through, the sky was clear, bright, and the sea lay beneath them once more. Hours passed before he dared to ease his grip on the controls. The survivors had fallen silent again, drained beyond fear. The woman had fainted. The older man muttered softly to himself, words Hale couldn't understand. He focused on keeping the plane steady, eyes fixed on the endless expanse of gray-blue below. By evening, fuel was running low. The gauges flickered again, unreliable. But the truth was clear enough. He wouldn't reach the mainland without refueling, and there was nowhere to land but the island. The thought felt like a blade twisting inside him. To go back was madness, but to stay in the air meant death. He had no choice. He turned the plane west, back toward the island that refused to release them. The others realized what he was doing and began to protest weakly, but he silenced them with a single look. If we crash, we die. If we land, we might live. I'll take those odds. The sun was setting by the time the island came into view again. Its outline glowed faintly red in the dying light, the forest like a smoldering scar against the horizon. As he descended, he saw the beach where they had taken off earlier, and something else. The wrecked boat was gone. In its place stood a crude structure made of wood and rope, like a watchtower. Figures moved around it, small and purposeful. They were waiting for him. The landing was rougher this time. The sand had hardened from the earlier storm, but the plane still skidded dangerously before coming to a halt. The survivors were too weak to move without his help. He guided them out one by one, his body running on instinct alone. The air was still, unnaturally warm. The sea was calm. Even the gulls were silent. They made for the edge of the forest, seeking shade as night fell. Hale scanned the perimeter, pistol drawn, every sense alert. The survivors collapsed near a cluster of rocks, too tired to go farther. For a few precious minutes, nothing happened. Then a sound came from deep within the jungle, a low, rhythmic chanting, human voices blending into something that didn't sound human at all. The older man whimpered. "They're calling the island," he whispered. Hale strained to listen. The chant grew louder, echoing through the trees. It wasn't a language he knew. It rose and fell like the rhythm of the tide, full of strange syllables that seemed to pull at the air itself. Then he saw them torches moving through the darkness, weaving between trunks like fireflies. The figures from before emerged, carrying their weapons, faces illuminated by orange light. At their head walked the tall man with the scar, his expression calm, almost reverent. "You came back," the man said, his voice carrying easily across the sand. "The island doesn't take kindly to defiance." Hale raised his weapon. "I don't care what the island wants. I came for them, and we're leaving." The man smiled faintly. "You can't leave. None of us can. The island chooses who stays. You think we built this place? We're only guests like you." Before Hale could answer, the ground beneath them trembled, a deep vibration that rippled through the sand and up his legs. The torches flickered. Somewhere in the jungle a tree fell with a thunderous crack. The chanting grew frenzied. The scarred man turned toward the forest, arms outstretched. "It wakes," he said softly. "It always wakes when someone tries to run." The tremor intensified. The survivors screamed as fissures split the ground near the tree line. From the darkness came a sound that was not quite a roar and not quite a sigh, something ancient and immense. Hale fired into the air, the gunshot echoing like defiance against the chaos. "Move!" he shouted, dragging the younger man to his feet. They ran toward the plain, the sand shifting beneath their boots. Behind them, the scarred man laughed, a sound that carried through the night like madness itself. They reached the aircraft just as the first waves of light began to spill from the jungle, a sickly green luminescence that bathed the trees in ghostly glow. Hale shoved the survivors inside, climbed after them, and started the engines. The plane shuddered, protesting, but the turbines roared to life. He didn't wait. The nose lifted, wheels breaking free of the sand as the beach crumbled below. For a brief, impossible moment, they were airborne again, the island shrinking beneath them. Hale looked down and saw the torches forming a circle on the beach, a spiral pattern glowing against the darkness. At its center, the scarred man raised his arms toward the sky, his face lit by that unholy green light. Then the sea rose up, swallowing everything in a single violent surge. The plane pitched upward, caught in the updraft. Hale fought the controls, vision blurring. Behind him, the survivors screamed, but their voices seemed far away now, fading beneath the roar of the storm that had no beginning and no end. And when the world finally stilled again, when the engines quieted and the sky turned black, Hale realized he no longer knew whether he was flying away from the island or deeper into it. The world returned in fragments, sound before sight, pain before clarity. Michael Hale woke to the dull roar of the ocean and the rhythmic creak of metal shifting under strain. His head throbbed. His body felt as if it had been torn apart and stitched back together. For a long moment he lay still, unable to remember where he was or how he had come to be there. Then the memories flooded back in violent flashes: the storm, the glowing forest, the impossible light, the rising sea. He sat up abruptly, gasping, his eyes darting around. He was inside the aircraft. The cockpit was dark, illuminated only by the faint gray of dawn seeping through the shattered windshield. The instruments were dead, the panels cracked, wires hanging loose like veins. Rainwater dripped steadily from the ceiling, pooling beneath the rudder pedals. Outside, the sound of the surf was louder than it should have been. Too close. He turned toward the window, and his stomach clenched. The plane had crashed back onto the island. It rested at a broken angle near the tree line, one wing half buried in sand, the other twisted upward, torn and useless. Smoke rose faintly from the tail. The storm had passed, but the sky remained the color of ash, heavy and oppressive. The ocean rolled sluggishly nearby, indifferent to his return. He could feel the island's silence pressing in on him again, the same dreadful stillness that felt less like peace and more like anticipation. "Hello?" he croaked, voice raw. No answer. He tried again, louder this time. "Is anyone alive?" "She?" A weak sound came from behind him, a cough, followed by a hoarse whisper. He turned quickly. The younger man was slumped against the bulkhead, blood matting his hair. His eyes fluttered open when Hale touched his shoulder. We didn't leave," he murmured. "I know," Hale said softly. He checked his pulse. It was faint, but there. The woman was lying nearby, motionless, her face pale as porcelain. Hale's throat tightened as he knelt beside her. For a moment he thought she was gone, but then he saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, barely. The older man, however, was not. His body lay twisted beneath a collapsed seat, eyes staring blankly at the cracked ceiling. Hale closed them gently. He spent the next hour dragging the survivors out of the wreckage. The morning light strengthened as he worked, revealing more of the devastation. The beach had changed. The shoreline had receded, leaving wide stretches of damp sand littered with debris. Trees farther inland had fallen, their roots exposed like skeletal fingers. And yet, despite the destruction, the island seemed untouched and spirit alive, in a way that made his skin crawl. When he was done, he built a small fire from the dry remnants of the emergency kit and sat beside the survivors. The younger man was delirious, muttering to himself. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, her breathing shallow. Hale tore fabric from his uniform to dress their wounds. Though he knew it would do little, he was running on instinct now, the same cold mechanical instinct that had carried him through combat zones and disaster sites. He needed a plan. The radio was destroyed, the fuel gone, the aircraft crippled beyond repair. There would be no second escape. His only chance now was survival and understanding what kind of place he was trapped in. As the day wore on, the heat returned. The air shimmered above the sand, thick and wet. Hale left the others resting near the wreck and walked toward the edge of the forest. The trees stood silent and dark, their trunks streaked with the faint green residue of whatever had glowed within them the night before. The smell was strange sweet, almost metallic. Every step he took felt heavier, as though the air itself resisted him. He moved deeper, the light dimming beneath the canopy. The ground was soft, layered with moss and fallen leaves. He found paths here, narrow and winding, worn smooth by repeated travel. The sound of insects filled the air, an endless, droning hum that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. He followed the trail until it opened into a small clearing, and what he saw there made him stop cold. In the center stood a structure, crude but deliberate, a circle of stones and wooden poles, bound together with rope and seaweed. Inside it lay the remains of the tower he had seen from the air, now collapsed and half buried. Around it, the ground was covered in bones. Not animal bones this time, but human hundreds of them, bleached and scattered. Skulls stared upward from the soil, their empty sockets filled with tiny white flowers. Hale's stomach turned. He crouched beside one of the skulls, brushing away dirt to reveal markings carved into the bone symbols, spirals and jagged lines that resembled waves. They looked old, worn by time, but some were fresh, the edges sharp. Someone had been here recently. He heard movement behind him and spun, pistol raised. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by shadow. It was the scarred man. "I told you," the man said quietly. "The island decides." Hale kept the gun steady. "You did this?" The man smiled faintly. "Not I. We only serve. The island gives, the island takes. You were not meant to come back, yet here you are. Perhaps it has chosen you." "Chosen me for what?" Hale demanded. The man stepped closer, the torchlight from somewhere unseen flickering across his face. "To replace those who left. The island requires balance. When something escapes, something must remain." Hale shook his head, backing away. "You're insane." "Am I?" The man spread his arms, gesturing toward the bones. "These were the ones who fought it. They thought they could flee just as you did. But the island is alive. It remembers. You felt it, haven't you? The way it watches, the way it bends the world around you." Hale didn't answer. He could feel it now, stronger than before. The faint vibration under his boots, like the heartbeat of something vast beneath the surface. The forest seemed to pulse with it, each tree swaying, not with the wind, but in rhythm with that invisible rhythm. The scarred man lowered his arms. "You can't kill what you don't understand, Captain. You can only obey." He turned and disappeared into the shadows before Hale could move. Hale stood frozen for a long time, his mind warring with itself. Logic screamed at him that this was madness, the ravings of a man broken by isolation. But another part of him, deeper and more primitive, whispered that it was true. The island had rules. It had claimed lives before and would claim them again. He returned to the wreck by dusk. The fire had burned low. The woman was awake now, staring at the sea. Her eyes were hollow but lucid. "He came back, didn't he?" she asked softly. Hale hesitated, then nodded. "They never leave for long," she said. "When the storm comes again, it will take us all. That's what it does. It feeds." Her words settled over him like the falling night. He wanted to argue, to tell her there had to be a way out, but the conviction in her tone silenced him. He sat beside her, watching the horizon. The sun had sunk into the water, leaving behind a faint glow. The younger man slept fitfully nearby, muttering in his fevered dreams. When darkness finally came, the chanting began again. It was fainter this time, more distant, as if carried on the wind from deep within the island. The same rhythm, the same low hum that rose and fell like the tide. Hale felt it reverberate through his chest, through the ground beneath him. He stood, scanning the tree line. In the faint light of the dying fire, he saw movement figures again, dozens of them, gathering just beyond the trees. He raised his weapon, but they didn't advance. They stood there silent and waiting, their faces half lit by the reflection of the flames. Then slowly one of them stepped forward. It was the scarred man again. He held something in his hands, a bundle wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the sand and stepped back. Hale approached cautiously, keeping the gun trained on him. When he unwrapped the bundle, his breath caught. Inside lay the flight recorder from his plane, the black box, torn free from the wreckage and placed here deliberately. But there was something else with it, his dog tags. "I told you," the man said softly. "It chooses who stays." Before Hale could react, the figures melted back into the forest, swallowed by darkness. He stood there for a long time, staring at the tags glinting in the firelight. The chanting had stopped. Only the waves remained, their rhythm steady and relentless. By morning, the younger man was dead. The woman didn't cry. She only looked at Hale with a strange calm, as if she had expected it. "It's your turn now," she said simply. Hale didn't answer. He walked to the water's edge, the tags clutched in his hand. The sea was mirror still, reflecting the gray sky above. For a moment he imagined he could see faces in it, those he had tried to save, those he had failed. The island stretched behind him, vast and silent. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight it, couldn't outfly it, but he could make a choice his own, not the island's. He turned back toward the forest one last time. The air shimmered faintly, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw the scarred man watching from between the trees. Nodding once, slowly as if in approval, Hale walked into the surf, the cold water rising around his legs, his waist, his chest. He kept walking until the waves closed over his head. When the rescue team arrived 3 days later, they found the wrecked aircraft but no sign of survivors. The official report listed the cause as weather-related failure. No mention was made of the island. It wasn't on any map, but the locals who lived along the coast whispered about it, the island that appeared in storms and vanished when the skies cleared. They said sometimes, if you flew too far west and listened closely to the static on your radio, you could hear a voice, calm, steady, and human. "This is Flight 79, it would say. Coordinates unknown, holding pattern, awaiting orders, and then silence. The island kept its secrets, as it always had, and somewhere in that eternal mist between sea and sky, Captain Michael Hale kept his promise to never leave them behind. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Check out my other videos. You'll find plenty more stories and adventures waiting for you. And if you like this one, share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow.